So I woke up this morning thinking this would be an episode about the Prime Minister sacking his Home Secretary. Well, that has happened, but it's also turned into an episode about a pretty major comeback. So let's just remember that moment. A black car pulled up here on Downing Street where I'm standing now. The back door opens and someone gets out. If you wanted a soap opera twist, you got it.
That's the security detail just opening the door for...
David Cameron?
What?
Wait.
I was not expecting that.
OK.
David Cameron, Lord Cameron, Foreign Secretary, can't be, can it?
Lord Cameron, as he's now known, is Foreign Secretary. James Cleverly has moved to Home Secretary, and Suella Braverman has been banished to the backbenches. A lot of questions, though, about how a Lord can make a government top job work, how Rishi Sunak will settle the right of the party without their poster girl, and whether David Cameron's track record on foreign policy makes him a good fit. So much to talk about. I'm Sally Lockwood, down here at Downing Street, and you're listening to the Sky News Daily. And with me to digest all this news is our political editor, Beth Rigby. OK, Beth, so here we are on Downing Street, just grabbing a quick moment.
Outside the gates now.
What a day.
What a day. I just need to sit down and a cup of tea, and maybe I need to blow dry my hair. That was astonishing, wasn't it? I think the thing was, after the Times article on Wednesday night, my phone exploded. And then it didn't stop actually until I got home, gone 11 on Thursday night. And the reason I say that was, as soon as the article landed, in which she appeared to undermine the police, in which she said some controversial remarks about Northern Ireland, repeated the words about hate marches, the parliamentary party kind of went into a mini meltdown, and I, unprompted, had messages from former cabinet ministers saying this has gone too far and she needs to go and this is undermining the party. And then that carried on into the morning. And so when there was a frenzy in Westminster, it wasn't being whipped up by the media. It was actually being whipped up by the fact that she had, in the views of a number of Conservatives, overstepped. And then the Prime Minister's team added fuel to that fire when they publicly disavowed that article.
That was quite a revelation, wasn't it?
Yeah, and at that point you're kind of like, has he had enough of it now? Because there's been a number of occasions where the Home Secretary had used language which was provocative, which grabbed headlines, which prompted an outcry which other cabinet ministers then have to go on the airways to defend. And instead of the Prime Minister talking about his agenda, he finds himself having to defend or getting other people out to defend her. So at the point where he says, no, the article, his spokesperson says the article wasn't cleared, you knew that this might be going to another level. And then it was a question of, does he outright sack her? Does he wait for a few days and see what happens with the Rwanda judgment about whether or not they can send planes from here to Rwanda for people that they do not grant asylum to? Does he actually seek a lesser sanction like a reprimand, a public apology? So this was all the discussion. In retrospect, given that we were about to have Armistice Day, there was lots of concern around the police in both of the pro-Palestinian march, and then of course what we saw with the far right come in and all that violence that we saw very early in the day around the Senator as the police were trying to protect the area. In retrospect, you can see why a Prime Minister might not want to further stoke a political row ahead of all of that. But by goodness, he moved quickly on Monday morning, didn't he?
Didn't he just? She hasn't said much since she was sacked as Home Secretary. No. Do you think she's going to be a problem for Rishi Sunak on the backbenches?
I absolutely think she's going to be a problem for him on the backbenches. And in the statement that she put out, she said, I will have more to say. Whenever she does speak out, it will be news, inevitably. When she was Attorney General, that's the most senior legal advisor in government. No one knew who she was. But by the time she finished being Home Secretary, everyone in the country knew who she was, i.e. she has used her platform in that senior role to really make her mark on the public consciousness. And if you want to run as a leader for a party, that's part of the challenge, to get cut through and be noticed. And now, as one of her supporters put it to me, now she is queen over the water. So she is sitting outside government. She's not bound by collective cabinet responsibility. She can say exactly what she wants to say. She has a following in the grassroots of the Conservative Party and amongst the right-wing media. And then, what's happening now, I think, tonight I'm told that the New Conservatives, this is a group of backbenchers that support her. It includes the likes of Sir John Hayes, Deputy Party Chair Lee Anderson, Miriam Cates, and also Danny Kruger, amongst some of them. I was told that from another Conservative MP that there was on the agenda talk about Braverman's leadership play. Now, they were very quick to say to me, this is not a leadership bid. Leadership play doesn't suggest that to me necessarily anyway. Leadership play is setting yourself up for when the ball comes out of the scrum, you're in pole position. Now, there's a question about whether she's overreached. Sally, I think some in the party think, maybe she's gone too far. Her supporters would say what the public want, what Boris Johnson showed, his success showed at that election, that people want leaders to govern in technicolor, to be vivid. They are the words of some of her supporters, that the old alignment of always winning on the centre ground doesn't wash anymore, that people want something else. Now, detractors would say it might be the values but of a very small group of voters, and that's not where they're going to win. And I think if we roll that right back round to this reshuffle, that's what Rishi Sunak's calculation is too.
So, speaking of the old guard, shall we talk about the main event today, which no one expected? Is that fair to say no one expected
David,
this?
I think that is fair to say.
Okay.
Someone messaged me saying, get your cameras on number 10. I was like, I love it when people message me that. And then the next thing I was like sort of trying to throw some makeup on my face to rush into a studio. And the next thing is the camera was on number 10, and on my telly box I saw David Cameron.
Talk me through that moment when you were waiting for the car door to open.
Well, it's just...
And David Cameron got out.
It was like drop your marmalade, your jaw goes slack, you drop your coffee, your eyes widen. You can't believe it. I couldn't believe it. And I think that I was not alone in the whole of Westminster. I think that was genuinely surprising.
And Westminster's not good at keeping secrets, Beth, but this did not leak.
It did not leak. And I think that what is interesting about this is kind of when you want to win something, one of the kind of strategies in military conflict is to confuse and surprise your enemy. And I think that this had a huge element of surprise, and that makes people stop and look and maybe relook at Rishi Sunak and think, hang on, this guy is prepared to take risks. He doesn't just want to manage, he wants to try to lead. Now, there'll be debates for days and weeks about, the pros and cons of Cameron coming in. Is it change or is it the old guard? Is it a Prime Minister in control or is it a Prime Minister having to get the other bloke back in to prop him up? All of that. But you cannot detract from the fact that that was an arresting moment in which it was signalled an intent. I think politically it suggests that it's a Prime Minister that, as I was saying, wants to go back more to the centre ground as he tries to fight this election. There was a sort of sense that he was going to kind of go further to the right, try and pick off lapsed Conservative voters that had gone to the Reform Party, and maybe he is coming back to the centre ground.
And what do you make of this appointment to the foreign brief for David Cameron? A well-known statesman on the world stage, a pretty tense moment for the world, but he's also got a rather different track record on China to the current relations we have.
Yeah, look,
China.
There is some disquiet on the backbenches already that I'm picking up. I think the first thing is just, look, this is politics. People go into politics. A number of them want to be constituency MPs. A bigger chunk of them want to be promoted. There's irritation, I think, from many that a massive office of state isn't being given to a current MP or given someone a promotion, but they're bringing a former Prime Minister back. But then on more substantive policy issues, David Cameron was renowned for being very pro-China. He and George Osborne heralded the golden era of Chinese UK relations. They wanted to do far more trade, far more business with China. As time has gone on, there has been a growing view in the Conservative Party that that was a mistake, that letting Chinese companies invest in key elements of UK infrastructure such as telecoms and nuclear were the wrong decisions to make. And actually some of those policy decisions have been unpicked by subsequent prime ministers such as Theresa May.
In a moment, I'm going to be speaking to Henry Hill from Conservative Home and former Conservative MP Anna Soubry for their take on all these moves. I'm joined now by Henry Hill from Conservative Home and former Conservative MP Anna Soubry, who was also a minister under David Cameron. Henry and Anna, thanks so much for coming on to talk to us today. It's been quite the reshuffle so far, hasn't it? Henry, to you first. What do you make of this comeback?
Well, it is surprising. It's one thing I didn't have on my bingo card is David Cameron coming back. I think in some ways it's a shrewd move. In principle, I think it's a good thing to have more senior politicians from the House of Lords. David Cameron is a politician of some stature, and in the Foreign Secretary role especially, it's a brief that former prime ministers tend to have had necessarily to get across quite well during their time in office. So in that sense, it's perfectly plausible. I think the politics of the whole thing suggests a very defensive election. One of the big questions that we've been asking is the Tories are facing a very difficult general election next year. Where are they going to focus their resources? Is it going to be on trying to dig in and entrench themselves in those red wall seats? Or are they going to be trying more to kind of shore themselves up in the so-called blue wall seats, which have traditionally voted Tory, but which have been drifting away in recent elections? And this reshuffle strongly suggests that they're going for option B. You've got David Cameron back, Jeremy Hunt is staying in post, you've got James Cleverly going to the Home Office. None of that really suggests that Rishi Sunak's pitch to the electorate is going to be, in sort of presentational terms at least, an especially right-wing one.
And Anna, before we get into some of the detail, your initial reaction, I mean, it certainly doesn't seem that anyone really saw this move coming.
Well, the David Cameron move, no. I mean, it's just extraordinary. But first of all, Suella Braverman arguably should never have been appointed in the first place. Rishi Sunak, of course, brought her back after she'd had to step down because she proved herself unfit for office, but he brought her back for no other reason than to shore up his own position. He should have sacked her when she made the horrible comments about people making a life choice of being homeless and living in tents. And then obviously he should have sacked her last week after her comments, which undermined our police and got involved in operational matters. So, I mean, I think it shows how weak Sunak is. Having said that, thankfully she's gone and David Cameron is back, and it's extraordinary. Look, I will always be loyal to David Cameron. He got me elected as a member of Parliament. I was proud to serve in his governments, and I have a great deal of time for him to be very clear about his abilities and what he'll bring to it. But my goodness me, I mean, it really shows the paucity of talent that there is in the Conservative Party in Parliament, that you have to bring back David Cameron.
You mentioned that the reason Suella Braverman was appointed by Rishi Sunak or reappointed by Rishi Sunak as Home Secretary was to keep the right of the party happy. She does have a very tough stance on immigration. Is that going to cost Rishi Sunak now in terms of speaking to that gallery?
I think the real test of all of this is whether or not somebody I think is particularly unpleasant and obnoxious in political terms, and that's Lee Anderson, who's Deputy Chair of the Tory Party. Is Lee Anderson going to stay as Deputy Chair? It's incredible if he actually promotes him, which would be breathtaking. Is Sunak going to keep him there? Because if he really wants to see off these appalling people who are making lifelong Conservative voters say, I will not vote Conservative at the next election. If he wants to keep those people on board or get them back on board, he's going to have to ditch the like of Lee Anderson, because he turns the political stomach of anybody that is more centre-right. Just bringing David Cameron in, I don't think is enough to keep those sensible One Nation Conservative voters, and what about Tory party members? That's a different kettle of fish.
And Henry, it's a very tense time for the world with war in Ukraine, wars return to Europe, and now this situation in the Middle East, which threatens to escalate. Will it make a difference having someone like David Cameron, who is a well-known statesman on the world stage representing the UK?
I don't think many people thought James Cleverly was doing a bad job. The Foreign Office brief is an interesting one because there's not an awful lot of political division, apart from over Gaza now. There's not a lot of political division normally over the broad thrust of Britain's foreign policy. You had Europe, which was a big row, but that again wasn't really the foreign secretary's fiefdom. That was definitely the prime minister and the government as a whole. But both parties are broadly united on what to do about Ukraine. At the moment, both parties at the top level are broadly on roughly the same page about Israel and Palestine. So I don't really see what big changes it could make on that level, because simply there's nobody crying out that there are massive deficiencies in Britain's foreign policy that one man would be able to change. But ultimately, the bigger change for the government, I think, is Cleverly going into the Home Office.
No, I think it's a bit more than that, if I may say. And look, Brexiteers don't like to hear this, but Brexit really damaged our international reputation. The leadership, the politicians in other countries thought that Britain had completely lost the plot. Now, to have somebody of Cameron's stature and a former Prime Minister will make a big difference to the way that other countries see the United Kingdom.
I'd like to just read you both a WhatsApp message that's been leaked, if I may, and get your reaction to it. Sky's Sophie Ridge has received a leaked WhatsApp message from a Tory MP WhatsApp group, which reads, WTAF. DC, David Cameron, had to resign because he failed to stand up to the EU and is completely gutless. He won't be able to address the House of Commons at questions whilst we are actually witnessing two major conflicts. And finally, he is an unelected Foreign Secretary appointed by an unelected Prime Minister. Let's see how this one plays out. Henry, to you first, what's your reaction to that WhatsApp message?
Well, I mean, the first part of it is a diehard opponent of David Cameron over Europe. And my position, frankly, and I speak as somebody who supported Brexit, is, get over it. Like, we've left, you won. It doesn't make sense to cut yourself off from the kind of talent pool that you have when you should be trying to heal that rift. But there will be Foreign Office ministers in the House of Commons who are perfectly capable of fielding questions. And Cameron will be in the House of Lords. And as anyone who is familiar with the House of Lords will tell you, often the level of actual scrutiny that the House of Lords can apply to the government is of a much higher calibre than you sometimes find in the Commons, because it's full of people who've done this. They're experts, they're specialists, they're old political hands. There's nothing constitutionally improper about it. And frankly, there's nothing democratically improper about it. The government is answerable to the Commons. MPs will be able to put questions to the government, and David Cameron, as Foreign Secretary, serves at the pleasure of the Prime Minister. So I just have to straightforwardly disagree with that MP's assessment.
I think this is a very serious problem which David Cameron and indeed the government will face, because we have two huge crises happening now. Obviously the Ukraine-Russian war, obviously what's happening in Gaza and with Israel. And our Foreign Secretary is not in the House of Commons, and I think that's actually a real problem, especially in relation to Gaza, which is increasingly going to get more controversial, because many people like me who support Israel, who want desperately to support Israel, are really struggling with some of the pictures that are coming out from Gaza, and the killing of children and total innocence is really sticking in the craw now.
Is David Cameron an election winner for Rishi Sunak? Being the most high-profile Remainer isn't necessarily going to be popular with his party.
Boris Johnson in 2019 transformed the political map of England and Wales. He won a huge swath of seats the Tories had never won before. And he built a very broad Conservative coalition, which has proved, I think, unsustainably broad, which means the Tories, if they're fighting a defensive election, they need to choose. They need to choose whether or not to try and double down on the direction of travel that Boris Johnson indicated in 2019, or they need to try and double down on what they had before. And I think that what we're seeing here, and what the bringing back of David Cameron suggests, is that Rishi Sunak is leaning towards option B.
I think he's trying to minimise what could be extraordinary losses. To think that this so-called blue wall, where's this come from? I mean, sorry, it's all been invented. To have someone like Henry, it's not a attack on Henry because he speaks a lot of sense, but to think that you are facing such an electoral defeat You've got to bring back a former Prime Minister to shore up what would otherwise be absolutely rock-solid, safe Conservative seats. Speaks volumes about the state of the Conservative Party, most importantly, in the eyes of the electorate.
The Conservatives are 20 points behind in the polls. It's very hard to come back from something like that. And I think that actually Rishi Sunak's reaction to that, which has been to be very, very cautious in policy terms, is not going to dig him out of that hole. If anything, this is the time when you go for broke and you try doing something big.
And Anna, I'm just going to draw attention to one of your tweets from today where you welcome David Cameron as Foreign Secretary for many reasons, but you also say in the same breath that you want Keir Starmer as the next Prime Minister. How do you square that circle?
Baroness Sayeeda Vazi has been hugely critical of what's been happening with the government's stance in Gaza and Israel, and she's very much in favour of a ceasefire, etc., etc. And it was Sayeeda put out a tweet using words like, I welcome back David Cameron because he's credible, because he's experienced, and he is compassionate. And I agree with her on that. And what I was saying, I do welcome those qualities coming into government. But hey, let's be very clear about this. We need change. And the idea, Sunak said just the other week, he turned his back over 30 years of too much compromise, and he criticised effectively David Cameron's governments for being part of that, and he was now the author, the leader, the orchestrator of change. What a load of old baloney that's all being shown to be. No, we need proper change, and the only way we get proper change is a change of government. And when you look at the qualities that Keir Starmer has, he's got exactly the qualities that we need in a Prime Minister. And I hope he is in number 10 come the next general election.
OK, so back on Downing Street, let's just get a few last thoughts from our political editor, Beth Rigby. So we've got Braverman out, Cameron in, a multitude of other changes today. How is this going to impact Rishi Sunak next year?
For weeks, we've been talking about the Rishi Sunak reset, and that was meant to be conference, didn't really work. Then it was like, well, he's got another chance in this King's Speech. Now, I know that's quite an abstract thing, but that's a moment where a Prime Minister sets down his legislative agenda for a year. And in those moments, you can go, I'm going to be the radical Prime Minister on housing reform, or I'm going to do this on immigration, or, you set down an agenda where you try and signal to the public that you're going to do something quite dynamic or dramatic. That didn't happen. In fact, I think the party was in despair after that. It just felt like, someone said to me, it feels like he's just given up. But now, today, this is a reset moment. It genuinely is. He is clearing out his cabinet. He's putting new faces into key briefs. And he's trying, I think, to show his party that he is in control, that he will do as he chooses, and almost challenging them to battle him. And to the country, I think what he's trying to do is put different people, fresher faces, into different jobs in order to show that this is a different Conservative Party. And whatever the rights and wrongs of bringing in a former Prime Minister who is not, by very dint of nature, a fresh face, he does signal to Conservative voters out there who might be disillusioned with this current administration that the Prime Minister has brought back effectively a one-nation Conservative who did very well, may I say, against the Lib Dems in the southwest of this country in the 2015 general election. So he's bringing him back in. James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, where he's going to be having a key role as Home Secretary.
Is he happy with that?
I don't know, actually, Sally. I'll ask him. I'm sure he won't tell me. I'm sure he'll say, I'm absolutely delighted, Beth. I think James Cleverly has thoroughly loved being Foreign Secretary, and I think being Foreign Secretary has worked very well for James Cleverly because he's now talked of as a leadership contender. He's got a much harder brief in the Home Office, a much harder brief.
Especially with Rwanda on Wednesday.
With Rwanda on Wednesday, but he will also be leading a key policy, and he will be all over the airwaves all the time, talking about Home Office policy, talking about immigration. So you've got Jeremy Hunt at the Treasury doing economy, but the Prime Minister really leads on economy anyway because, that runs through his veins. And then you've got Vicky Atkins at Health, another key pledge he made about waiting lists. And you've got James Cleverly at the Home Office. So what he's really doing is making sure that around him he has this team of loyalists that he can trust, that he doesn't have to be looking over his shoulder all the time. I should also say he's brought Richard Holden in as party chair. This is a former government advisor. He knows all the dark arts. He is an operator, and he also is a Red Wall MP. Likely to lose his seat, actually. I think his seat's been dissolved. So he's bringing in people, so Richard to help him on the election, and then this cabinet that he hopes will help sell his message. I mean, whether or not personnel changes and a freshening image can really undo the rot that has set in from the Conservative Party over the course of Johnson to Truss, and then kind of the Rishi Sunak reset that never really sort of got beyond bumping along the ground. I think that's a different matter entirely, Sally, and let's see if it works.
If nothing else, Rishi Sunak has proved one thing today, Beth. You can still be shocked.
Yeah, but I'm always shocked. I mean, you know, in this place, you always think you know what's coming around the corner, and you never really do.
Except the guy with the megaphone.
Oh yeah, no, I know that he is normally around the corner. that I do know. But yes, I am. You know, I was shocked today, but I think the parliamentary party was shocked, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing for a Prime Minister that has been on the ropes now for weeks.
Well, that's all from us after a pretty crazy day down here at Downing Street. Back with the Sky News Daily again tomorrow.